Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Georgia legislators and activists have been on the front lines for voting rights, urging Congress to pass federal voting legislation. Now, Senate Rules Committee Chairwoman Amy Klobuchar and Senator Raphael Warnock recently testified at a hearing to talk about the need for basic federal standards to protect the freedom to vote. So joining me now to discuss just that, we have Kiana Jackson, community activist and organizer, as well as Fenika Miller. She's a senior state coordinator with Black Voters Matter. Thank you, ladies, for joining us. We're going to jump right in talking about the fight for fair access to the ballot. And since we have our young activists with us, we're going to start with you. Talk about all of your efforts that you've been putting in, all the hard work to get people like yourself to get up and vote.
Yes, ma'am. So down here, I work in mostly rural parts of Georgia, rural minority communities. And so it's kind of the organizing effort down here to get people registered to vote is very different. Um, uh, most times you can go and stop at a grocery store and get hundreds of people registered to vote. We're down here. We have to do mostly canvassing, going door to door. We have houses that are miles and miles away from each other, but we're making sure we're touching every single black voter that we can because we know that registering Black Georgians to vote is extremely important in pushing Georgia towards more and more progress.
All right. Well, speaking of just that, the Atlanta Journal Constitution recently had an article that said Georgia has one of the highest voter registration rates in the nation, with 95% of its citizens over the age of 18 signed up to vote. Um, Finica, do you know how many of those voters are actually Black?
Yes, we have about 2.5 million registered and eligible Black voters in the state of Georgia.
All right. And talk about the fact, I mean, the most important thing is that so many Georgians are registered to vote. Can you talk about the importance of the Black vote and making sure that we touch those people, especially with that restrictive voting law that your state just recently passed?
Absolutely. I think we've seen the importance of the Black vote, right? Georgia, because of organizers and activists on the ground like Kiana Jackson down in South Georgia and in rural communities across the state, we see what the power of Black voters. We saw that Black voters helped to deliver the presidency as well as 2 Senate seats in the last election cycle. And we know that because of that turnout, historic turnout, that our voters were targeted by GOP with Senate Bill 202 and those voter suppression tactics. We also see our Secretary of State purging voters, over 101,000 about a month ago, and here lately about 200,000 more voters will be purged. 40% of those are Black and brown voters. And so over at Black Voters Matter, our sweet spot is turnout and mobilization. And so our focus is to make sure that those 2.5 million registered eligible Black voters get to the polls unimpeded and without obstruction.
Yeah, I want to ask both of you ladies this question. We'll start with Kiana. When you come across people, especially those that look like us, and they say, you know what, it doesn't matter. Why vote? Our vote doesn't matter anywhere. They're going to do whatever they want to do. How do you combat that to make them actually get up and vote? Kiana, we'll start with you.
Well, the first thing that I always do is we have to validate people's concerns, and validate once again that we do operate and abide under a system that has systemically disregarded Black votes. Black people are often put to the bottom of people's totem pole when they do get elected. You know, we're at the top of the list of concerns when people are campaigning, but when it's time for legislation and policy, we are often put on the back burner. So we have to validate those concerns. But after we validate those concerns, we have to make voting relatable to people's everyday lives. Down here in Southwest Georgia, we didn't campaign on Black voters are going to turn the state blue, Black voters are going to put Joe Biden in office. We were telling people there's a public service commission race, and your utility bills are double your rent. You have to get out and vote to change that. So we have to make voting in these we have to make voting in local elections, voting in these sort of disregarded elections. That's what our people have to focus on, because Joe Biden becoming president isn't going to change the everyday life of Black people. But what it will do is it'll put legislation on the front line that will help Black voters. And so that's what I, lead with my organizing with. This isn't going to change systemic racism, but it will put us on a path towards getting some true legislative, educational, economical, social changes.
And Fenika, I want to ask you this. I want to ask you a similar question, but slightly different. To piggyback off of Kiana, when she said we are at the top of the list when it's time, Fenika, excuse me, when it's time to vote. They're in our neighborhoods, they're in our churches, they're in our organizations passing out flyers. President Biden said, "You have always had my back and I will have yours." Do you feel like the president has our back now, considering the fact that nearly 400 pieces of legislation has been passed this session, restricting in some way the right to vote?
Absolutely. As our co-founders often say, we can't discount the strides and the progress that has been made since we've seen President Biden in office. But what we can do is ask him to pick a side, right? What is infrastructure without voting rights? Our communities and Black voters have been fighting for just the right to engage in the democratic franchise without barrier, for hundreds of years. And so we need them to act, and we need them to act right now. To pass federal legislation to help mitigate some of the harm that will come from these restrictive voter suppression bills that we see. Georgia was the epicenter of the country during the election with the 2 Senate seats on the ballot. And then we also saw that we were the epicenter of the country with these voter suppression bills, 47 states, over 300 plus bills now. We need federal action now, and we need the president, and we need Congress, and we need the Senate to act right now.
Absolutely. I want to thank you ladies for joining us. It was a pleasure having both of your voices, and best of luck as you continue to fight for our right to vote. Thank you.